What's up, everyone? I'm Ana Kasparian, and you're watching The Point. We have a great show ahead for you guys, and we're going to do a little bit of discussion on foreign policy, something you don't see too often in the mainstream media these days, and we're going to talk about Afghanistan. Remember, we're still in that country, and it's been nearly 13 years. Well, it turns out that Obama wants Hamid Karzai to sign something known as a bilateral security agreement, and he refuses to do so. So what's the drama behind that? We'll discuss that issue with our panel. Also, does it make sense to ban the word bossy when women are referred as such? That's something that Sheryl Sandberg is trying to really push in a new campaign of hers. And also, a Minnesota state representative said something racist on Twitter. But was it racist? He says that that was not his intention, and we'll discuss that. And finally, one fraternity is banning pledging, something that's kind of unheard of when it comes to fraternities. Why are they doing so, and will they actually stick to their guns? But before we get to all of that, I want to give you guys yet another example of how our elected officials don't represent us, they represent the powerful. When Edward Snowden leaked information about how the NSA is spying on us, there were people like Dianne Feinstein, who's a senator from California, who were very supportive of this spying program. In fact, she said, quote, "It's called protecting America, duh." Well, it turns out that she's in favor of people being spied on, the American people that she's supposed to represent. But she's not in favor of the government or the CIA spying on her. In fact, when she found out that the CIA might have been spying on members of Congress, here's what she had to say during a hearing.
The CIA did not ask the committee or its staff if the committee had access to the internal review or how we obtained it. Instead, the CIA just went and searched the committee's computers. The CIA has still not asked the committee any questions about how the committee acquired the Panetta Review. In place of asking any questions, the CIA's unauthorized search of the committee computers was followed by an allegation, which we now have seen repeated anonymously in the press, that the committee staff had somehow obtained the document through unauthorized or criminal means, perhaps to include hacking into the CIA's computer network. As I have described, this is not true.
Oh, she don't like that. You don't like it when the government's spying on you, but for some reason it's okay if the CIA or the NSA indiscriminately collects data on us when there's absolutely no probable cause, when there's absolutely no reason to suspect that these Americans have ever done anything wrong. Now, she's not the only one. Senator Lindsey Graham is another supporter of the NSA spying program, but he was outraged to find out that the CIA was spying on members of Congress. In fact, he said, quote, "This is Richard Nixon stuff. This is dangerous to the democracy. Heads should roll. People should go to jail if it's true. If it is true, the legislative branch should declare war on the CIA." And they're even calling for John Brennan, who is, of course, the director of the CIA, to resign should these accusations be true. So it's kind of incredible because after it was discovered that world leaders like Angela Merkel were being spied on by the NSA, there were members of Congress that were outraged about that. But how many members of Congress were outraged when they found out that Americans were being spied on? They were very muted when that type of information was leaked. But when people in power are being abused, well, we can't have that. And it kind of shows you how our so-called representative democracy isn't working the way that it's supposed to, because we elect these people to represent us, but they don't represent us. They go around representing the powerful. They go around representing corporations. They go around representing people that line their pockets with campaign donations. And it makes me angry because the media has failed us when it comes to this topic, and the American people have failed us because we should be more outraged about this. We should take to the streets. We should protest. We should ensure that our privacy is secure and safe and not violated by the government in the name of national security. Because the reality is it has absolutely nothing to do with national security. This hasn't really done much to keep us safe. All they're doing is collecting this information on us, and they can use it against us in the future if we do anything to stir the pot, if we question authority, or if we hold government officials accountable for their actions. So I don't want to hear anything from Dianne Feinstein Feinstein or Lindsey Graham. I don't want to hear any moaning or whining or complaining when they're being abused. They should be doing the same when those types of abuses are being done on the American people. So let's go ahead and meet our panelists for today. We have Mike Preisner, who is an Iraq War veteran and co-founder of March Forward, an organization of vets and active duty soldiers that encourages currently serving personnel to resist deployment. Mike's been on the show quite a few times. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks, Anna. Glad to be here.
Jenny Churchill is a producer for Take Part Live on Pivot TV, and more importantly, a good friend here at TYT. Thaddeus Russell is an American Studies professor at Occidental College, as well as the author of A Renegade History of the United States. Thaddeus, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
So let's move on to the topic of Afghanistan. You don't see a lot of talk of Afghanistan in the mainstream press these days, but something significant happened recently. Hamid Karzai refused to sign something known as a BSA, a bilateral security agreement, and as a result, Obama says that there will be harsh consequences for it. Take a look.
For American troops, the Afghan war will be over at the end of this year. The question is how they will go. They'd been hoping to leave a small force in place. But now President Obama has asked the Pentagon to draw up plans for a possible full withdrawal. That's because Mr. Obama has failed to convince the Afghan President Hamid Karzai to sign a bilateral security agreement, or BSA, leaving the U.S. without a legal framework for continued operations.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Karzai's relationship with the U.S. is at an all-time low. His decision to free alleged Taliban militants against American wishes was only the latest sign of what he bluntly calls mutual distrust.
Now, as I mentioned, this hasn't been getting a lot of press, but what also hasn't been getting a lot of press is U.S. Approval ratings for the war in Afghanistan. So when we first invaded, Americans were all for it, and now more and more Americans would love a full withdrawal. In fact, if you look at 2001, 89% of Americans said that the war was not a mistake. They were in favor of it. Fast forward to 2014, 48% say that the war was not a mistake, meaning the majority of Americans think that it was a mistake. So I'm wondering what you think the consequences of this little scuffle will be, Mike. I mean, do you think that this is something that is actually going to be disastrous if Hamid Karzai refuses to sign the BSA?
Well, I think we need to be clear, first of all, the United States does not want to leave, and Karzai does not want the U.S. to leave. But they may be forced to leave, like what happened in Iraq. Just look at what the U.S. politicians are saying right now. You know, we're presented with this war as an unpopular war, one that people are against, and, you know, Obama was elected with many people thinking he was going to end that war, yet it's only extended. And now that we're at the end of the war, after that extension by Obama, we don't see the politicians and the generals saying to the Afghan government, yo, let us leave. We've been here long enough. You guys can handle us. Let us get out of here. They're going to the Afghan government and saying, you better let us stay. And not only that, you better let us stay and do whatever the hell we want in this country. Karzai is an illegitimate president, not recognized by the majority of Afghans, who's now a billionaire by looting the Afghan government. He doesn't, you know, he supports the U.S. He was in place because of the U.S., but he doesn't want to be the one to sign the agreement. He wants someone else to be able to sign it. So that's what's happening today. And so all the while this is happening, you have rich politicians on both the U.S. and the Afghan side deciding what's best for them in this situation, while many thousands of Afghans and U.S. service members are having their lives destroyed on a daily basis.
So, Jenny, I mean, that's kind of hard to follow up to, but I mean, what do you think is actually going to happen? I mean, there's some talk that, yeah, Hamid Karzai may not sign the BSA, but the elections are coming up next month, and maybe the new leader will do that.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's tricky to wait around for a new leader to sign an agreement like that. I mean, next month is the initial election, then there's a second election that occurs if someone doesn't get more than 50% of the vote. Then that could take until late into fall to figure out who's actually taking over. So Karzai's supposed to step down in May, but he's probably not going to. I mean, I just don't understand. I feel like a lot of people are shocked that this is happening. And I'm like, okay, all along our relationship with Karzai is we've said jump, and then he said, maybe later, but only if it looks like it was my idea. So, I mean, I just think I would assume that we would come to some sort of agreement, because I think that most parties believe that to have some troops there to support the efforts of the Afghan military is a good idea on both sides. I don't see this going to a full withdrawal.
Mm-hmm. So, Thaddeus, do you think that it is a good idea to avoid a full withdrawal?
No, I want them out now, and I always have. And I think that we have to understand why Obama will never want to leave entirely, which is that, for one reason, is that it's the only military base the United States has in Central Asia. Afghanistan touches it's either near or touches China, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, very important strategic points in Central Asia. He wants, ideally, a permanent base. We know he's been negotiating with Karzai to keep permanent base there, and substantial number of troops. He does not want that. Another reason that Obama wants to be there is that people miss this. He is a Wilsonian idealist universalist. He wants to remake the world in the image of the United States. Read his writings. In 2007, he wrote an article in Foreign Affairs about this. He said the United States needs to lead the world. It needs to remake the world in our image. He called for a build-up in the U.S. military, in the Army, and the Marine Corps. He really wants the United States to be everywhere, very much like the neocons did under Bush. And this is a central strategic point for the United States. He does not want to leave. He may, as Mike said, may be forced to leave by the Afghan people, although the Karzai government, I'm also convinced, does not want him to leave either, because they are being propped up by the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the U.S. leaves, the Karzai government is completely screwed, because even though he's kind of been a thorn in the U.S. side every step of the way, he's seen as the U.S.'s guy to the entire country.
When all is said and done, they're allies. They help each other out. So
Karzai is a complete puppet, but sometimes even the puppets come in contradiction with their puppet master, and that's what's happening.
Right. Do you think that there's an element of theater to it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Karzai playing this balancing act where, he's the president of Afghanistan, where the people overwhelmingly oppose the U.S. presence, and not just the U.S. presence, but the regular slaughter of innocent people in night raids by special forces, by drones. And so Karzai has to be supporting the occupation because that's the only reason he's able to exist physically, but at the same time has to act as though, he's condemning the United States for the actions that they're committing, when it's precisely those actions that are the reason that he's in power. So absolutely a lot of theater.
Well, I think we have to mention, too, that one of the reasons why it's seen as so dangerous by Karzai and other leaders in Afghanistan for the U.S. to completely remove all troops is because, contrary to what may be presented in the press, this has not been a success.
Exactly.
We did not win this war. So I just think when you look at the situation, when we leave, things are not going to go well. We've not won a lot of allies in the region other than the exact government that we've set up there. And the reality is, things like you mentioned, night raids, drone strikes, those things only breed terrorism. They make people wake up and say, hey, you know what, those people who killed my parents while they were at my uncle's funeral, maybe not my friends.
Yeah, you and Thaddeus make a really great point because, there's this obsession, this neocon obsession, and the Obama administration's obsession with going into other countries, invading them, and making them the perfect image of what Americans consider a democracy to be. At the same time, we have issues with our own so-called democracy here, right, where we have severe violations of civil liberties and civil rights, and we need to deal with that. But what I'm wondering is, when will it stop? Because we've invaded Afghanistan. There are several other countries that aren't democracies that violate certain rules and rights that we have here in the country. I mean, how far is this going to go? Are we constantly going to invade countries, in some cases preemptively, to fuel this ideology and also this military-industrial complex? Because there's a profit motive behind it as well. Thaddeus.
Yeah, I was going to say, I slightly disagree with Jenny on this. I think in a way you could actually argue that Afghanistan has been successful for the United States in the way that Vietnam actually was, which is that we made a point to people, or we sent a message to people around the world. If you are going to take up arms against us, if you're going to rebel against us, we are going to go to war with you for as long as it takes. We are going to murder you for 13 years or maybe longer. We're going to prove to you that the price is too high to pay to rebel against the United States and our hegemony in the world.
Wouldn't you argue that fuels more hostility toward the United States?
Absolutely, for sure, yeah, and that's why I oppose it.
So then how is that a success?
Right, well, it depends on whose side you're on, but I think from the perspective of the regime in the United States, I think you could argue that we sent the message to the brown-skinned people in the world, if you stand up against us, we're going to drop bombs on you for 13 years or maybe longer.
And it's an important parallel with Afghanistan and Vietnam, because just like Vietnam, in Afghanistan today, and actually many, many years ago, back in 2009, when President Obama, gave his speech about the troop surge, which Robert Gates writes in his book Duty, Obama was very apprehensive about, which is a very kind of, if you're one of those soldiers being sent, extent, looking back at that, isn't the most heartening thing that you were being sent to a war that there was no real belief in, even by the political leaders who were sending you. But back then, years and years ago, just like in Vietnam, the military leaders and politicians acknowledged that their military objectives could not be completed in the country. So that military victory that they talked about was an impossibility, and they openly acknowledged it. But they didn't want to send the message that the biggest empire in the history of the world can be defeated by one of the poorest countries in the world. So they adopted a strategy of a slow motion retreat, where they essentially are retreating, they are withdrawing, they are saying, okay, we've lost militarily, but we're going to do it over many, many years, killing very, very many people in the process, and sending a lot of soldiers home in wheelchairs and coffins along the way as well.
I think there's an interesting thing when you have discussions like this. I think most Americans don't realize just how complicated situations are in countries like Afghanistan and geopolitically in the world. If you look right now, I don't even know how, given current politics, a withdrawal is even physically possible, considering our route to get supplies out goes through Russia, who, guess what, we're not getting along with right now.
It was physically possible to withdraw from Vietnam. That's what the United States did. It eventually withdrew entirely, and I think that was a good thing. Even though it resulted in, yes, a communist regime in Vietnam, that was not our business to liberate that country.
Oh, I mean, we're going to leave behind billions of dollars in supplies if we don't cooperate with Russia in some way over Ukraine. If we piss them off enough, and we're like, hey, guess what? In the fall, we're leaving Afghanistan. Maybe not.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the complexity of everything, because there's also an element of Pakistan, right? The element of Pakistan. Like, people are wondering whether or not Hamid Karzai is kind of holding the U.S. hostage when it comes to the BSA, because he wants more to be done on the issue of Pakistan and its relations with Afghanistan. So yeah, there are other factors at play, and I think that there is a very black and white presentation of this issue in the press. But what I always wonder about is what the future holds for other conflicts. Like, what kind of precedent does the situation in Afghanistan set? Because if we are able to spend 13 years in war and there are no real objectives at this point, what is the objective? Democracy? I mean, is there a democracy in Afghanistan? Is it safe to be in Afghanistan as a foreigner? 21 people died in an attack at a Lebanese restaurant in January. Just recently, just this week, a Swedish journalist was killed, shot in the head in broad daylight as he was doing an interview. At this point, the Taliban in Afghanistan has kind of shifted their tactics, and they're no longer just focusing on the military. They're focusing on foreigners. They're focusing on people that are supposed to be doing journalism there, and we haven't done anything to really change the way things work in the country. So I'm concerned about that.
Sure. Well, the Taliban have shifted their strategy because they've defeated the U.S. militarily in the country, and of course have catered their tactics to that. But Afghanistan, talking about looking forward, I mean, Afghanistan is an example that the politicians in Washington, our esteemed generals, these brave heroes in the Pentagon, are willing to send many, many thousands of young men and women from the United States to die and lose limbs in a war that they're just like, hey, I think we can capture this country. It should be easy. Let's go in. 15 years later, it was a complete disaster. Let's keep sending them. Maybe things will work out in our favor. But it's all under this larger foreign policy scheme of the goal is every country that is not within the U.S. sphere of economic and military influence must be brought into that sphere of influence. Sometimes it's done through predatory loans. Sometimes it's done through things like sanctions and economic warfare. But independent countries who don't acquiesce to the will of the United States, sometimes they can be taken militarily. There's a variety of different tactics, but that is the number one underlying thing between all U.S. policy towards any country is how to bring it in to the sphere of U.S. banks and corporations. And look what's happening in Ukraine right now under this same policy, where the U.S. government is willing to sponsor the rise of open neo-Nazis and fascists in a new government in Ukraine, just to be able to say that this country is now going for U.S. contracts and loans and EU loans and IMF loans rather than those with Russia.
You can find a Taliban in every country. There's authoritarians and anti-democratic people and misogynists and murderers in every country. I mean, should the United States be the police force for the world? I mean, this is the question that's been debated for about 120 years now. Those of us who oppose that have been losing, generally, but that's the question at hand here. Right, of course there are bad things going on. There are anti-democratic forces around the world. There are people that I don't agree with, that I would never want to live under, but I don't want to change another people's country, another people's way of life at the point of a gun paid for by my taxes.
So Thaddeus, just one last question, and it goes to you. I want to know what you think the U.S.'s role should be in terms of foreign policy.
Out now, completely.
In any and all cases?
Yeah, I mean, I would close all military bases outside the United States. I would bring home every single soldier from outside the United States tomorrow.
All right. Well, we got to end this conversation, but in the next segment, we're going to talk about rights here in the United States, specifically the rights of women, and whether or not it makes sense to ban certain words in order to ensure equality. So stick around for that. Welcome back to The Point. Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook, wants to ensure that there's more equality for women in the workplace. In fact, as you guys all know, she's trying to push women to be leaders, and one way that she's trying to do that is to ban certain words that might insult women. Take a look.
This is Ban Bossy. Take one.
Pushy. Stubborn. Stubborn. Pushy. Pushy. Stubborn. Stubborn. Bossy. 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 Bossy.
When I was growing up, I was called bossy.
I think the word bossy is just a squasher.
Being labeled something matters.
By middle school,
girls are less interested in leadership than boys.
And that's because they worry about being called bossy.
We need to tell them it's okay to be ambitious.
we need to help them lean in.
Words matter.
Let's just ban the word bossy and encourage girls to lead.
To be strong and be ambitious.
Listen to your own voice.
There are no limits. Dare to be you.
You can change the world.
Let's ban bossy.
Be brave. Be you.
Ban bossy.
Join us to ban bossy.
I'm not bossy. I'm the boss.
Encourage girls to lead. Take the pledge at banbossy.com.
Okay, so I despise this, and I hate it because I think that it makes women look like they're whiny, and it actually sets them back a lot, because now we're gonna be the language police and decide, you know, what we like and what we don't like. Sheryl Sandberg was called bossy by one of her educators when she was younger, and it really hurt her feelings, and I feel like she's kind of held on to that until today. And I think that her cause is an important one, but I think the strategy is a little weird. I don't know if it's actually going to achieve what she wants to achieve, but I want to get your thoughts, Jenny, because you're the other woman on the show right now.
Yeah, I'm still trying to recover from that video. I just want to know, has it occurred to anyone else that it's a little bossy to tell people not to say bossy? Like, this is outrageous. Yeah. I'm like actually disgusted by it makes me, I'm like almost shaking. I'm so mad. I find it unbelievable that your tactic to try to empower women is to protect them and make them like delicate little flowers who can't handle being called bossy. Yeah. Guess what? I was called bossy when I was a little kid, and I'm glad, because sometimes when you're bossy, you don't get what you want. Yeah. And I just think that we need to teach women and men to be better leaders and to lead people in a way that they want to do the things that you want of them, instead of just, you know, barking at them and telling them what to do. I actually think that's a good lesson to learn as a child.
Yeah, I think a good lesson. I mean, I don't know if this is a good idea with all parents and their kids, but when I was growing up, I mean, I got a bunch of really bad insults as a girl. You know, I was a little bossy. I wanted to control certain things. Yeah, I know. I was bossy, right? And I remember being super sensitive about it, and I would go to my mom and be like, Mom, they called me bossy, or whatever it was, whatever the word was. And she was like, so? She's like, are you kicking ass in life? And I was like, I think so. She's like, then stop crying. And I was like, oh, okay. And it made me realize, like, you need a lesson in not caring what other people think about you. You got to work hard. You got to do things that you think will help you succeed in life, and that's it. People are going to hate you no matter what. You could be the best person on the planet, and people are still going to insult you. You can't ban words as a result of that.
Political correctness, and I work at a college, so I know all about it, is often very conservative, with people not understanding how it's conservative. And this is a classic example of that. So what is good about being a boss, first of all, right? I mean, I have a son, I don't have a daughter, but if I had a daughter, I would not be interested in pushing her to become a COO of a corporation, or a mayor of a city, or God forbid the president of the United States, where she would have to murder and incarcerate and deport people. I think that we need to call into question leadership itself, as a matter of fact. And one of the nice things about what you see women doing now, they're going into college in larger and larger numbers, but you see in polls and in various ways, you see that women are sort of not that interested in taking leadership positions. The liberal magazine, The Nation, just was wringing its hands about this, and I said, maybe it's because women understand that it sucks to be a boss. Maybe that's what we should talk about, especially in this society, but maybe forever. Let's talk about what it is to be a boss and why many, many people don't want to be a boss, and let's let the bossy people boss us, right?
Right, but I see a really big problem with that, right? So one of the biggest issues I see in the country right now is political apathy and leadership when it comes to protesting something that Americans don't like. So for instance, this whole issue of NSA spying, right? Why aren't Americans getting up and arguing that, hey, you know what, we're not gonna take this shit anymore. We don't like it, you can't indiscriminately collect data on us. We don't have leaders in place to give the government a huge middle finger and say, fuck you, we're not going to let this happen anymore. I think that that's a really, really big problem. So if you want to have a discussion about leaders in terms of CEOs, then I think you make a really interesting argument. But women are underrepresented when it comes to Congress, right?
But the NSA has been totally discredited, and that was not because of leaders. It was because the people rose up and said, this is terrible.
But they're still doing it.
That was a leaderless movement that has been very, very effective. The NSA has no credibility now, and that's because the people in large numbers on their own without leaders said no.
Occupy was a leaderless movement,
Absolutely.
And it failed as a result of that.
Well,
I mean, I love, and I'm one of the biggest supporters of Occupy. I loved it, but the fact that it didn't have enough people organizing it, and it didn't have at least one spokesperson to give a clear, concise message as to what they were achieving, led to the media discrediting them.
It brought into the mainstream discourse, whether you agree with it or not, it brought into the mainstream discourse all these questions about corporate power and corporatism and government control of, Wall Street, et cetera, and vice versa. That's a successful movement in my view. That's actually a very successful cultural movement. It changed the way we think about our society without leaders, so I actually disagree with you.
Well, we had a conversation, but that didn't actually translate into any policy. I mean, the same abuses are still true, are still happening.
And there's some, and of course, and then, there's some very obvious defects in this video. Of course, combating sexism and misogyny is a very important thing, and especially in this society. But seeing Condoleezza Rice in that video, I mean, maybe she should ask the women of Iraq how they feel about equality. Probably a million mothers who lost children in that war. So these are the people that are holding up as women leaders. You too can be a war criminal. But I understand the sentiment and why people may agree with it. As a man, I understand that if I walk into any room or classroom or workplace or anything, if I stand up and am super bossy, they're going to be like, wow, that is an assertive leader right there. And people are going to think I'm great for it. But if my counterpart, who's a woman, displays even 50% of that assertiveness, they're going to be called bossy. They're going to be called, things like that. So I acknowledge that, and I am completely for smashing all of that in the most aggressive of ways, in a cultural way, like this campaign is trying, like allowing, really creating social stigma against people who want to use these types of words and put these types of labels on people. But Sandberg, the one leading this, has some really serious things. Talking about equality for women. I mean, she's very much for the inequality in the workplace for women in the developing world working in sweatshops. I mean, she's not talking about equality for them. And so I think Sandberg's approach to this is saying, yes, it's a sexist, it's a misogynist world, we're going to do these things, but the way that you combat it is by being a relentless, cutthroat capitalist like myself. And I don't think that's the lesson that we need to be
Jenny gets the last word.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that one of the really important things about this is the fact that it all comes back to this idea that we are sheltering our children. And the reality is, it's a tough world. And if you want to make a difference in that world, you better be ready to bring it in that world. And if you live in a false world where everybody gets a trophy and nobody says bossy and everyone can be whatever they want, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I just believe that.
I 100% agree with you. And I just want to close this topic by saying, look, there's this huge double standard when it comes to men and women in the media, right? So let's say Cenk Uygur, who's the lead host of The Young Turks. he gets fired up on the show on a regular basis. He yells, he uses cuss words sometimes. I mean, he gets really fired up. And people will say, hey, you know what? He's a really passionate host. If I do the same thing, I'm an emotional host. So it's funny how the wording changes depending on the gender of the host. But those types of double standards exist, and I'm not going to go around and say, no, I'm going to ban comments because I don't like those comments and I don't like people calling me emotional. If that's their perspective, that's your perspective. I'm trying to give you information. You don't like my delivery, you can go ahead and watch somewhere else. So it is what it is. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some lawmakers that are facing heat for racist tweets. Now, one lawmaker in Minnesota recently tweeted that the NBA is full of criminals. In fact, this is State Representative Pat Garofalo, and the tweet said the following. Let's take a quick look at it. Let's be honest, 70% of teams in NBA could fold tomorrow. Nobody would notice a difference with possible exception of increase in street crime. So he tweeted that. I don't know what led him to tweet it, but he immediately got a bunch of criticism because, of course, when you really look at the NBA, 76% of the athletes there are Black. So they felt that he was making a reference to race there. And I want to open it up to you guys because there have been some people who have defended him. Thaddeus, what do you think? Is there any legitimacy in what he tweeted there?
So technically, sure. I mean, what he's saying is what Black leaders have said for a long time, including civil rights leaders, which is that Black people, yes, especially men in this country, are disproportionately likely to commit crimes. Now, that is the beginning of the discussion to have, though, right? Like, so why is that? What causes crime? Why is it disproportionately African-American men doing that? Does it have anything to do with the drug war? What is this guy's position on the drug war? I would love to know that. How about mandatory minimum sentencing? What is his position on that, right? That's putting a lot of Black men into prison for no good reason. I think a lot of us agree. I do give him credit for being a renegade against sort of political correctness. I mean, so beginning the discussion, I think that, you know, denouncing him morally for stating a claim that's just political, I think is almost worse than what he said. Let's have this discussion, everyone. GOP, let's talk. What is your position on the drug war?
He didn't make this comment, though, because he was thinking of all these deeper political questions. He made this comment because he's a disgusting racist, and people supported him who are disgusting racists, and that was really it. He realized afterwards that, oh, wait, my huge base of disgusting racists, people are going to see it outside of that base, and so now I have to reel it back in really quickly.
That shuts down the discussion, right? And that may be true. I have no idea what this guy thinks, but you just shut down the discussion by doing that. That's what happened to him. And what he did was, which is what always happens, is he then comes out with an apology for having an idea that was publicly stated. I'd rather, instead of shutting him down, start talking to him and talking to him about these things, right? The prison industrial complex. Should these things be illegal? Why are all these Black men in prison? What does poverty have to do with that? How do we fix poverty, right?
I see this very differently than both of you. Honestly, I think that this is yet another example of veiled racism. I actually would not go as far as saying that Pat Garofalo is racist. I do not know him. But this is kind of symptomatic of the way that we converse about things in our society. So that was very clearly veiled racism. It reminds me of what we saw with Richard Sherman. Everyone started calling him a thug, as though thug didn't have like a connotation, like if it had been a white person who had done exactly what Richard Sherman was the one that freaked out in the Seattle game at the end. For those who don't know. But if a white person had done what he had done, people wouldn't have called him a thug. You know, it's an interesting thing about the way that we speak about things, and everyone wants to believe that we're so far above racism, we've come so far, we've moved, but there are still these ideas, and I think Twitter actually does a really good job of kind of, people say things that they may say in their family room or to their best friend on Twitter that they normally wouldn't say in public, and then they realize, and this is why he apologized, then they realize and go, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that in public. But I think it does, to your point, raise a discussion that is an important discussion to be had, but then, to your point, also has elements of racism.
Yeah, so I actually think you guys are all making really good points, to be honest with you, because I think the conversation of racism is an important one to have. So there is this weird misconception in the country that since we elected a biracial man as president, hey, you know what, we've already dealt with all of our race issues and we should just move on. Anyone who cries racism is just full of it. They're race baiting. We get that a lot on the show when there are clear cases of racism that we report on. But no, look, social media is proving that there are people out there that are racist. Like, it's something that we have to discuss. Why do people still push these stereotypes?
See, I think that calling him racist actually serves conservative ends, which is that it stops us from having the discussions about what causes this thing to happen, which is true. Black men do disproportionately commit crimes. This is true. You cannot deny this. Now, why the racist argument would be because they're black, because they're biologically predisposed to crime, right? I don't share that argument, but it begins the discussion that's very important about why that happens. Stating the fact itself is not in itself racist and must be stated. In fact, if you are opposed to the incarceration of black men, you must start there. You must say, yes, they do disproportionately commit crime. Now, we can either make those things no longer criminal, as in the case of drugs, or we can talk about why poverty is in the black community and causes people to commit crimes like that. But to dismiss it as racism stops the discussion.
I think we have to be really careful here too, because I'm not personally completely convinced that there's a large difference in the amount of white people and black people who commit crimes. Right. Do black people get disproportionately arrested? Yes. Absolutely.
For sure.
But how much of that has to do with profiling
Then you're suggesting that poverty has no correlation, is not a cause of crime, which of course it is.
Socioeconomic status is the #1 indicator
and African Americans are disproportionately poor. So,
yes,
right.
okay. But Jenny also makes a very good point about how African Americans and minorities in general are usually targeted when it comes to these crimes. So if you look at the use of marijuana, for instance, right? African Americans do not use marijuana more than white people do, but there are more African Americans incarcerated for marijuana-related crimes than white people. Absolutely. So that's just one example of that. So it is important to put that out there. But look, here's the thing. He's talking specifically about wealthy NBA athletes. And he's saying, hey, you know what? If their teams fold, there's going to be an increase in street crime. That is offensive to say the least. I mean, if you don't refer to him as racist, or if you don't refer to that tweet as racist, what do you say? You just say, oh, well, I didn't like that tweet. Let's now discuss, the societal issues that lead to an increase in black people getting incarcerated.
Right, there's no ambiguity about it. It was a blatant racist statement by a racist who wanted to say nothing except, black people commit a lot of crimes. And that was all he was saying. There was nothing else behind it. I don't want to shut down discussion about race. Of course, it's a discussion we need to have, but I want to shut down racists. I mean, I don't want to have a discussion with this guy to try to win him over and tell him about the drug war and convince him that he should be against the oppression of African Americans in the United States. I think that guy should be shut down. That guy should be out of office. But we have a government that is filled to the brim with this white supremacist mentality, and we have the institutions to back them up.
So racism in this country was largely eradicated. I mean, the belief in scientific racism was largely eradicated not by shaming racists, but by people struggling in the streets, right?
Well,
through
by
all
defining
sorts
racists and
all sorts
shutting them down.
Hold on, all sorts of means of resistance, from violent resistance, which I actually favor, which happened in the South, and nonviolent means too. It was actually stealing their power, taking their power from them through direct action, not by telling them, Ku Klux Klan, you're a bad guy for being racist. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, all those people understood that that was a waste of time, and worse, it also actually tends to just create worse racism. If you just shut someone down and say, you're a bad boy for being racist, they go in their corner, and next thing you know, they have a Stormfront website, right? I mean, it doesn't work. It is struggle in the streets, it's political action, it's social movements that do this, that get rid of this stuff.
I agree
it's telling them that the price is too high to pay.
Right, no, I agree that if the social action is the answer, but the civil rights movement didn't sit down with the leaders of the KKK and the racist white politicians in Washington and say, let's have a talk about race. They fought them and they shut them down. They stopped buses. I mean, they shut down school buses. That wasn't engagement. That wasn't discussion. That was saying that if you make a racist comment or if you out yourself as someone who is not for the rights of oppressed people in this country, then you are stigmatized. You are shut down whenever you try to open your mouth, and then people will mobilize against you. That's what should happen with this guy. But instead, we have a system where he's being defended all over the place for making really disgusting comments.
All right, well, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to discuss fraternities and how one frat has decided they are going to do away with pledging. So stick around with that and more. Welcome back to The Point. So it turns out that one fraternity, SIgma Alpha Epsilon, has decided that they are not only going to do away with hazing, they're going to do away with pledging. Take a look.
Labeled the deadliest fraternity in the U.S. by Bloomberg in December, SIgma Alpha Epsilon has decided to completely nix pledging and consequently hazing in an attempt to improve their image. Calling it a historic decision, the fraternity made the announcement to ditch pledging and hazing Thursday, saying it will protect SIgma Alpha Epsilon's future and to eliminate a class structure between our new members and our active members. Pledging is nothing new for college campuses, but SAE has had multiple deaths from hazing and alcohol-related incidents in recent years, including drug overdoses, hypothermia, and multiple cases of alcohol poisoning. Some are skeptical that the announcement counts as a mea culpa from SAE. One writer at Policy Mike said SAE is still far from accepting blame for the recent string of pledge deaths. Rather than acknowledging the tragedy of its pledge deaths, SAE provides a pragmatic rationale for its decision. The damage to our national reputation is making it difficult for chapters to operate.
Now, there have been a total of 10 deaths since 2006, and these are all members of SAE. So, of course, they've been dealing with lawyers. They've been dealing with a lot of bad press. And Jenny, some are wondering whether or not this new move has anything to do with the deaths. People are wondering whether it has to do with PR more than anything.
What I've been seeing about this is a lot of people are wondering if this has more to do with camera phones than a change of heart, which I think is actually an interesting thing to bring up, with people having, you know, a video device or a photograph device on them at all times. Now it's harder for sororities or fraternities to do these things in the dark. We've seen a lot of cases over the last few years where a video will come out or a photo and people are outraged that, you know, people are treating their peers like this. So I think this is more about the fact that kind of Pandora's box is open for them. I mean, if you were someone going to a college, right, and you didn't really want to pledge, but then you were like, ooh, if I could get in at that fraternity that keeps killing people, I could take some photos, I could make a YouTube video, and I could expose them. And I personally believe that's what this is all about.
So my question is, why should I care? Why should I care if fraternity brothers torture each other? I mean, it's consenting adults, you know, choosing this activity, you know, have at it, guys. I mean, if they commit a crime that threatens other people, sure, we have laws for that, we have cops for that. There's something that goes on college campuses, again, I know something about this, that I think contributes to the culture in those fraternities. And I don't really care what they do, but I think that, you know, it needs to be understood that most colleges completely shut down drinking on campus and partying generally. And I know this happens at my college. It's completely verboten to have any alcohol on campus at all, which of course, right, represses this urge to get drunk, which then on Friday explodes into this stuff that just that falls out completely. So the college I went to was this nice hippie college in rural Ohio where there were no rules at all about what we could do. And guess what? No one fell off of roofs getting too drunk. No one, I don't remember people even getting sick from drinking too much. There were no ODs. Let's treat these people like adults. Let's stop caring about what they do in their fraternity houses and let's let them drink on campus. I think it would actually have a salutary effect.
Yeah, I think that, you know, this could extend to a larger discussion about our policy when it comes to alcohol. I mean, you look at European countries, especially those who have more laxed laws when it comes to minors drinking alcohol, and it's kind of amazing. Like, they don't even really want to drink alcohol. They might have a drink here and there for dinner, but when they turn 21, they don't go nuts because that opportunity has always been there. So binge drinking is kind of unique to American culture, which is kind of fascinating. But Jenny, you don't seem to be buying that.
Well, no, I mean, I don't disagree with what you said, but I think that there's something else at play here. I think that what really comes in when you're talking about fraternities and sororities is this need that all humans have to belong, right? So you go and you want to be cool and you want people to like you, and they, you know, people go and they rush and they'll do whatever these people say because they so badly want to be a part of something. And what happens is the people in power, it becomes a mob mentality, and they are abusing these people's vulnerabilities and having them do things that they would never do of their own choosing. But when you're in a situation where you're in a crowd and everyone's saying, you have to do it, you have to chug that, you have to stand in this water, you end up caving to peer pressure, and you do these things that are putting yourself in physical harm, like in endangering your life.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jenna. You know, I have an amazing little sister who is a college sophomore right now. So of course I am very nervous about the presence of fraternities on college campuses, especially when you see things like, you know, just recently in the media, there was a college fraternity that was recorded chanting, "No means yes, yes means anal." And you know, knowing the reputation of college campuses, if you're a sexual assault victim, how likely is it that you're going to get any justice, or that your attacker is going to be brought to justice in any way? So that being the scene, of course, these types of institutions make me very nervous as a big brother, but it reflects something else. I mean, you know, anything we can see in our society, you know, all elements of culture, all these institutions, they're all reflections of some deeper core values. And because we have a society that is infected with racism and misogyny and elitism, the institutions of our society are going to display those very same attributes. And so in the university system and in the fraternity university system, which is in a lot of ways this good old boys club, it's going to become a breeding ground to encourage these things like racism and sexism and violence against women and elitism. And so it's a reflection of some deeper issues we need to address in this country.
Definitely, and I like that you brought up the issue of sexual assault on campuses. That kind of extends to administrations and the way that they deal with it, because there have been a number of cases where administrators don't want to do anything about it. They want to, brush these incidents, I should say, under the rug because they don't want the school to look bad. But, you know, if we're really going to have a deeper conversation about what happens on college campuses, yes, hazing and pledging is one thing, but we should discuss sexual assault. It's definitely a bigger problem. Thaddeus, do you have any thoughts on that?
So this is a major issue at my college, Occidental College. In fact, it sort of started there in some ways as a national phenomenon. What people don't understand about this often is that this is largely a result of the Obama administration forcing college administrations and faculties to adjudicate all sexual assault cases. If anyone brings a claim of sexual assault or rape on a campus, by law, the college administration is obligated to hold hearings to determine guilt in this case. So in the vast majority of these cases, there is no physical evidence. There is no evidence except her word and his word. And so what ends up happening is you have English professors and deans of students, and sometimes students themselves, asking questions about people's sexual histories in these kangaroo courts and colleges. And from that, of course, there's often no justice, or there's perverted justice, and there's very little due process. Both sides often get screwed, and then so the women often complain, rightly, because they're not getting a real hearing in some ways, and the men complain because there's no due process, and this is actually the root cause of this phenomenon.
Why doesn't it go to outside prosecutors? So, what was the reasoning behind Obama's decision to do that?
Right, I mean, so actually, so I've heard many feminists, not all, there's a split among feminists on this, many feminists have argued that we should do this because we can get better justice through the English professors than we can through the cops and the courts, which I'm not actually sure is true, because the worst thing a professor can do to a rapist is kick him off the campus. So he's still walking around. He's not in jail. If there's really a rapist around, don't we want him in prison?
I mean, yeah, it's a criminal offense.
Let's take him to the cops and the courts and get him in prison so he's off the streets. He can't do this again. So there's something disingenuous about this feminist claim that this is a better means. Actually, I don't think that's true. And feminists since the 1960s have really reformed the criminal justice system around rape. It's far from perfect, but it is so far better than it was in the 1950s and 60s, when you could say rape all you wanted and no one would listen to you. That's not the case anymore. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a very bad move by a lot of feminists in this case.
All right, perhaps that's a topic for another episode of The Point. That's really fascinating. I didn't know that Obama was the person behind that movement.
Yeah, 2011, yeah.
All right, well, we got to get going, but thank you so much for joining us, guys. This was a really fiery panel, which I absolutely love. Mike Preisner, please tell our audience more about your organization.
Sure, well, people can go to marchforward.org to learn more about the movement of veterans and service members who are actively opposing the war in Afghanistan and trying to inspire each other to refuse to fight in the war in Afghanistan. And people should also go to answercoalition.org to see the work that I'm a part of opposing this new war drive in Europe and the current U.S. backing of a neo-Nazi government in Ukraine.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Jenny Churchill.
Yeah, so you can check out the show that I produce, Take Part Live, on the Pivot Network, Monday through Friday, midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific, and it's hosted by Jacob Soboroff and Kara Santamaria, who are both fabulous, and should check it out.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, Thaddeus Russell, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm the author of A Renegade History of the United States, which is sort of the even more radical version of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I'm Ana Kasparian. You guys can check me out at youtube.com/TheYoungTurks Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's when we do our live show. And if you don't catch the live show, of course, you can watch our clips. And we will be back next week with another episode of The Point. And maybe we'll have a longer discussion about that sexual harassment issue on college campuses. Super fascinating. And I thank you guys all again. We'll see you soon.